Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Wells from Starhearth Astrology, and I am here to talk to you about eclipses. Now, we know because not everyone's life blows up around eclipses, that not every eclipse affects everybody equally. So I wanted to make a little video to talk about the eclipses and also to talk about the things that can make them more likely to affect you and your chart. So we are headed into what is called eclipse season. Eclipse seasons are 2 or 3 eclipsed lunations. They happen when there is a new moon or a full moon close to the nodes, close to the south node or the north node. And usually you'll get one of each. And they work in a cycle that's actually part of a much bigger cycle, but they're going to happen in a pair of signs usually for about 2 years. So we're going to get an eclipse season once every 6 months in a pair of signs. So right now in Aries and Libra for about 2 years. So about 4 eclipse cycles per kind of eclipse cycle within a certain pair of signs. So we are about to have our first solar eclipse. A solar eclipse happens on a new moon. And so it is like, it's a new beginning with a lot of fanfare. It's like a super potent new moon. And then we have lunar eclipses. Lunar eclipses happen on full moons. Those are kind of super emphasized culminations of things, right? So at a new moon, we're beginning a new lunar cycle, we're beginning a new story arc, and then at the full moon, something is culminating, a story is coming to kind of its peak, it's fully visible. You know, things are invisible at the new moon, the moon is invisible, and then they grow and grow and become more and more and more apparent, and then we see what they are, and then we start integrating that information and managing that information, and they sink back down into invisibility. So we have our first solar eclipse in Libra. So this, this super jacked up new beginning for the Libra area of your chart. And then our lunar eclipse that happens on October 28th is actually in Taurus. So that is kind of a leftover from the Scorpio Taurus eclipses that we're coming down off of. So that is going to be kind of the final culmination of those eclipses. And so often the way this shows up in your life and in your chart is that when you're having eclipses in a pair of signs, it's going to happen for using whole sign houses. In opposite houses, you're going to have something shifting over here, and then we're going to feel its effects over here. And it's going to be this larger story arc that lasts about 2 years. And eclipses don't always trigger events. They often trigger insights that kind of move you to the next part of whatever you're working on. So, right? So if I am, having eclipses in my 5th and my 11th houses, maybe, I'm negotiating and going through a process with the creation of my art and my audience. Maybe I am dealing with, right, my own creativity and how it impacts the community and how I'm engaged in the community. And every 6 months, there's a little bit of like a shift in that dynamic that kind of moves the story along forward. So we're heading into eclipse season, which is the kind of moving the story along. So it can be super potent. The insights, the communications, right? Time gets kind of funky, and that sometimes it moves really fast, or sometimes we feel outside of it. Now, there are certain things that can make that more likely. And there's certain kind of things that might be present in your chart that can make you more sensitive to these eclipses. So for the Aries Libra eclipse cycle, it's nice to check in at this point because we had an Aries eclipse this spring on April 19th. And so if you can see wherever the Aries falls in your chart, And if you don't know, you can take your rising sign and watch one of my archetypal life path risings, and I talk about each of the signs and each of the houses. So look for a kind of culmination in there. Mine was very funny because mine is my 3rd house, which has a lot to do with social media and how you show up on that. And I got my 1,000th YouTube subscriber on the Aries full moon. So that felt like, oh, okay. It's kind of dead on. So you can do a check-in because it's going to orient you towards how things are going since we're already 6 months into this cycle. Now, what can make you more susceptible to these? One, if you are a cardinal sign rising. So that is if you are an Aries rising, a Cancer rising, a Libra rising, or Capricorn rising. Because if you have that rising sign, then these eclipses are falling in angular houses in your chart. That means 1, 4, 7, or 10. And those houses tend to be these kind of big pillar, big ticket items in our life. That's very obvious when they have changes. You know, the cadent houses, I'm talking about 3, 6, 9, and 12, those things are in flux. They're kind of baskets of smaller things. So when things change in those houses, it's not always so apparent in our lives, right? Sometimes those can be really internal processes, but the angular houses tend to be very obvious. If there's an eclipse in your 1st house of identity, you might totally change how you identify. If there's an eclipse in your 7th house, your orientation towards relationships or your relationship might change. And that's a pretty obvious core thing about you. 4th house topics have to do with your home and where you live. And 10th house is kind of like the big idea of your career and your life's work. So you can see why, if you're a cardinal sign rising, right? Even if you're a Capricorn rising, that means these eclipses are falling in your 4th and your 10th houses. So it covers all the cardinal signs, not just Aries and Libra. So that's kind of a big one. If you have your luminaries, so your sun or your moon in Libra or Aries, or the ruler of your chart. So, you know, even if you are an Aquarius rising, then the ruler of your chart is Saturn. And if Saturn is in Aries and there happens to be an eclipse right on top of it, that's really going to affect you. So, so having kind of really important planets for your chart in Libra or Aries, in places where they are going to possibly be conjoined or opposed by eclipses. That is one thing. If you are in a Libra or Aries profected house year, so this goes to annual profections. I think I have a video on that. But basically, based on your age, you have different houses get kind of highlighted for the year. So if one of those houses is your Libra house or your Aries house, then it's going to be super potent to have eclipses falling in those houses. Because those topics are already emphasized. And then when we get eclipses, they're going to be emphasized even more. Now, another thing that might affect you a lot more is if you are born with your nodes in Aries or Libra. So if you are born with the South Node in Libra and the North Node in Aries, then this is called your nodal return, when the nodes return like that. And if you are born with your South Node in Aries and your North Node in Libra, similarly will affect you a lot. You are in your nodal opposition. And the way that these transits work, nodal oppositions happen every 9 years. So you have them at 9 and 27. Let's see. They happen every 9 years, but then 18 years from each other. Because the nodes return to a pair of signs every 9 years. So 9 years in, they're in the opposite orientation, and then 18 years in, you get a nodal return. And nodal oppositions tend to kind of you kind of have the possibility of getting lost or getting off course, or even if that's not what's really happening, that tends to be how it feels. So it's like, oh, I thought my life was going to go this way, and it actually is going a completely different direction. I think that that really shows up at the nodal opposition around 27, because it's right before the Saturn return, and it kind of brings us into the Saturn return. And then I think the nodal returns, you kind of feel like, oh, okay, I've like hit my stride. I'm like doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, yes, things are coming together. And so those happen at 18 and 36, and so on and so forth. So if your nodes are in Libra and Aries, these eclipses will hit you more. Yeah, so that's what I have for you. Let me know how that Aries eclipse has been showing up so far. And yeah, if you check in with this video, let me know how these eclipses are hitting your chart. You can also book a reading for me if you want some more personal attention to that. Right now, I have an eclipse discount because I love doing readings in between eclipses. So if you book a reading before our first eclipse on October 14th, you can get $13 off any reading on my site, including recorded readings or live readings, by typing in the code Eclipses 2023. I hope to see some of you there. Thanks very much.